So today, let's work on some smooth jazz techniques. We wrote a short solo over a simple chord progression that fits the style. Let's listen to it, and then we'll go through the different techniques that we use to create this kind of sound. And be sure to stick around until the end of the video while I'll tell you how to get the PDF and the backing track to play along with. We also made a list of all of the techniques to be on the lookout for in the solo. And by the way, we've used a single motive to drive the entire solo, which makes it way easier to develop the solo consistently. So like it says in point 1 of the arrangement, we're going to take this original C Lydian motive in the first measure here and just sort of iterate it by modalizing it to different chords, using different chord scales, using rhythmic displacement, and adding pickup notes and all sorts of techniques. So here's our first motive right here. This is what we're going to be using to write the entire thing. All right, now the next time we see that is just a couple measures later over here. And we're modalizing the riff, like we said, to D Ionian. And we've also displaced it rhythmically, I guess, later in this measure as it relates to where it was in the first measure. And at the end, you'll see there's an inversion of the motive with a tail. Over here in measure 7, we see our motive again displaced even later. So we had it on the end of 2, and then the second iteration was on the end of 3. Now we have it on the end of 4, and it has a slightly different angle to it as well. So here at the end of our progression, where we recap back to the top again, we have a copy of our original motive once again. And that main motive is then sort of answered again by our next variation in measure 11, still using the same C Ionian chord scale, slightly different angle. Check it out. Our next development of the motive is built off of F Lydian for this F major 7 chord. Starts a little earlier and also has a tail at the end of it, so it's a little longer than our last playing of this motive. Our next use of the motive is going to set up our new chord progression in this new section, and like the last one, has a little bit of a head to it, a couple extra notes in the beginning, makes it a little bit longer. Here we have our motive yet again on B flat major 7, so we're going to be using a B flat Ionian scale here. And remember, the whole idea here is you can use this motive whenever you want. So like that's what you see us doing here. Just take note of how we're ending this motive to match the chord that we're going to with this G flat and this D flat here. Take a listen. So our next technique here has to do with the use of upper structure pentatonic. So over here, what we're basically going to be doing is using a 3 minor pentatonic on top of, or a 6 minor pentatonic on top of some of these chords to improvise. First example is here in measure 6 on the F major 7. We're using the 3rd of F, A minor pentatonic, to create this line. Our next use of this technique is over here in the next phrase, and we actually use it back to back here. So we have a 3 minor on top of this C major 7, so that's E minor. And then right after that, we have an F sharp minor, a 3 minor of D major. Here's another use of our 3 minor pentatonic on top of B flat major 7. So here we have D minor pentatonic. And here on top of this E flat major 7, again the 3 minor, G minor pentatonic. And here in measure 30 is our last use of the 3 minor pentatonic, this E flat minor pentatonic on top of C flat major 7. And if we circle back to measure 22, we can see the only use that we have here in this arrangement of the 6 minor pentatonic. So it's in measure 22 where this E flat major 7 chord is. 6 minor over a major 7. Our next technique, technique 3, is pretty straightforward. We're basically going to be using minor pentatonics on the root or Dorian on the roots of the chords. So the first example of that we have here is in measure 19. Take a listen. And then again, right after on this A minor 7. And then again, right after that on this D minor 7. So those first 2 examples were all pentatonic. These last couple are Dorian. So here we have C minor 7. There's where we're going to put our C Dorian. And our last example here in measure 28 is A flat minor 7. We're going to do A flat Dorian. So our next technique is actually really cool. We only use it in this one measure here. It's the use of upper structures. So here we have an upper structure triad on the beginning of the measure, and then a use of an upper structure chordal towards the end. So on minor 7 chords, we can use a 5 minor triad. So on this F sharp minor 7, the 5th of that being C sharp, means we can use a C sharp minor triad to do stuff with. And later on in the measure, you see the use of a B4-7 perfect chordal. And that's because you can also use chordals on top of minor 7 chords. But these you have to build on the 4th degree of your minor 7 chords. That's why you see it being a B4-7. So here we have in measure 5 the use of upper structure triads, and upper structure chordals. And like I said before, these are really, really useful ways to get these outside sounds and these really cool textures and colors to your chords. So important that we have entire courses dedicated to them. So check those out, seasons 1 and 2 of upper structures. But let's take a listen to our use of this technique here in measure 5. Our next technique has to do with the grid, rhythmic grid of the song. So if you haven't noticed already, our song here is heavily reliant on a triplet grid. So we're going to embellish that at times, and we're also going to break away from it. We're going to use like 16th note grids with some of the runs. Our first example of that, well, is right off the bat. You hear the triplet motif that we talked about earlier. Yeah, so there in our first use of the motif and our first iteration of it, really heavy embellishment of the triplet grid. But right after that, we're going to switch the grid to 16th notes. And then right back to the triplet grid after that. And that constant changing to and from these different grids is a really cool technique that not only do we use here, but I recommend you try messing around with on your own. Our next technique, pretty common. So we're going to be using grace notes at the bottoms of our voicings. These voicings either being triads or dyads, 3-note or 2-note chords. Here's our first example of it over here. And you see another use of that technique over here in measure 12. Our next technique has to do with breaking up these lines and using accents to create really cool syncopation, polyrhythms, and hemiolos. And our first use of that is here in measure 7. So you can kind of see, by way of using these accents as a scaffolding, we have like a polyrhythm, right? We have a 2 plus 5. At first glance, it might be easy to see these accents as the genesis of this polyrhythm, this 2 plus 5. But where this actually came from was us breaking the line up and changing the direction of the motif. And again, over here in measure 18, we have what appears to be just a straight triplet rhythm, right? But by breaking up the line, and you can see with some of the accents here, there should probably also be an accent on this second D here of that measure, which you'll hear when we play. We're creating like a 2, 2, 4, 2 sort of polyrhythm with the breaking of the lines and the use of these accents. This next one is really cool because it is nothing but groupings of 3 using triplets, which seems pretty straightforward. But because we've started it early, we've anticipated the 3. The 3 doesn't line up with the beat. And I probably should have mentioned right after that, we have a hemiola effect with these triplets being paired up into groups of 2. So let's listen to both of those uses of line breaking, accents, and hemiolas back to back. And our last point, point 8, has to do with harmonizing using 4. So a lot of what we're implementing here has to do with pentatonics. Check out our course on pentatonics. It's really fascinating. It exposes a whole world of things that you can do with this really common and ubiquitous scale. And we're doing some of that here when we harmonize with the 4th, because we're getting that from the perspective of the pentatonic. And you can continue to see those 4ths, again, informed by the pentatonic scale, strewn throughout these next few measures of the arrangement here. All of our members will receive a PDF with today's topic. If you're not a member yet, you can become one by clicking on the Join button or in the link provided down below. And remember, you can access all of our previous exclusive access content by getting our music theory journal on mdex.com. And the backing track to practice this solo with is at the end of this video right now. Enjoy. As always, thanks again for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Please share us with your friends. It really helps us out a lot. Leave a comment down below. And YouTube seems to think you're going to like one of these 2 videos here. So stick around and check one of those out. We'll catch you next time.